Because she was searching for her phone while driving, she didn't notice that someone was standing in the middle of the road. By the time she reacted and tried to brake, it was already too late. But to her surprise, after the man staggered to his feet, he hurried away as if trying to escape. Feeling both guilty and curious, the woman got out of the car to check, seeing traces of blood on the ground. She didn't hesitate and immediately chased after him.
Désolée. Ça va? J'ai freiné dès que je vous ai vu, mais... Vous voulez que je vous emmène à l'hôpital?
Despite her worried questions, the man still didn't say a word. Seeing the wound on his head still bleeding, Louise grew extremely anxious. She told him to wait right there, then hurried back to her nearby home. She grabbed a first aid kit from the storage room and instructed her daughter Emma to call the town doctor, then prepared to head back to the scene. But just as she stepped out the door, she saw the man had followed her here and was staring intently at her fruit trees.
Savais faire la tarte aux poires?
Darcy est en vacances, il est sur répondre.
Quoi? Non, je crois que ça va.
Tu es d'où? Qu'est-ce que dit la météo pour demain?
Hearing the strange things the man said, she couldn't help but wonder if her car accident had caused him some kind of brain injury. Since they were already at her doorstep, Louise hesitated, then invited Pierre inside. She set out some simple food for him and prepared to clean his wound. But unexpectedly, each time she tried to touch him, Pierre instinctively avoided her.
Vous voulez pas que je vous touche? Mais vous voulez que je vous soigne?
Seeing that Pierre remained silent, Louise taught him how to treat his own wound. Then she went upstairs to find a thick quilt from the wardrobe, deciding to let Pierre stay the night. By now, the night sky had completely darkened. Whether it was out of guilt for his injury or genuine kindness, Louise couldn't bring herself to send him away. But what she never expected was that the man she had brought home today was actually a top genius coveted by many nations. At that very moment, several teams were searching for Pierre in these mountains. As night faded and dawn broke, it was soon the next morning. When Louise, an early riser, came downstairs, she was shocked to see that all the books on the table and the kitchen utensils had been neatly arranged in order. It was obvious that Pierre had done all this. At breakfast, Louise thanked him for it, but once again, he remained silent.
Qu'est-ce que vous avez fait de mes cours? Je les avais laissés sur la table.
Je les ai mis dans le sac et j'ai rangé le sac dans le buffet. Comme ça, on ne voit pas les mauvaises notes.
C'est quoi cette histoire?
8 en histoire, 5 en maths et 11 en français.
With just 2 sentences, Pierre managed to offend the rebellious Emma. Sensing the tension at the table, Louise quickly changed the subject. I'll drive you out of here in a little while. Since his wound was no longer serious, Pierre naturally had no reason to stay any longer. Before long, they arrived at a part of town where the most taxis gathered.
Préfère que ça soit vous qui m'emmeniez.
Oui, non, je peux pas. Je suis très en retard.
Without giving Pierre a chance to speak, Louise headed straight across the street to a bank. While she was waiting to meet with the bank manager,
Qu'est-ce que vous faites là? Non, vous pouvez pas rester là.
Pierre took out a notebook and said he would wait for her to finish her business. In short, he insisted that Louise personally drive him home. Faced with someone so stubborn, she had no choice but to agree. Soon, a staff member called her into the bank manager's office.
Cette maison, c'est tout ce qui me reste. J'ai fait tout ce que vous m'avez dit. Je me suis endettée pour me mettre aux normes européennes, j'ai cédé des terrains, je suis passée en bio.
As a single mother, besides working and taking care of 2 children, she was burdened with enormous debt. Her only options for survival were to sell either the house or the orchard land, but Louise couldn't bear to part with either. Thus, her conversation with the manager ended on a sour note. Deep in thought, Louise returned to the car and saw Pierre sitting alone by the fountain. With no other choice, she decided to keep her promise and drive him home herself. Fortunately, Pierre's home wasn't far from here. Seeing the shelves inside filled with books, Louise was a bit surprised. She hadn't expected Pierre to be a businessman. But soon an elderly man appeared, dispelling her assumption. It turned out he was the owner of the bookstore, and Pierre was just an employee. Perhaps sensing Louise's confusion, Jules began explaining on his own. Pierre's parents had passed away when he was very young. Too young to work and pay rent, he had been evicted by his landlord. Feeling sorry for Pierre, Jules had given him a job at the bookstore and allowed him to live in a small room on the 2nd floor. Since it was unlikely they would cross paths again.
Qu'est-ce qu'il a?
Comment ça?
Il est différent, non?
Il est honnête, fiable, fidèle. Il ne ment jamais, n'a aucun intérêt pour l'argent, et il ne veut de mal à personne. En effet, il est différent de la plupart des gens.
Louise stopped asking questions about Pierre. But what she never imagined was that her love story with this genius was only just beginning. The day passed uneventfully, and night soon fell. While fiddling with his laptop, Pierre noticed that the temperature would drop to -3 degrees Celsius tonight. Louise, sleeping soundly, was awakened by noises outside. Looking through the window, she saw Pierre at her door, arranging several wax cylinders.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Il faut chauffer les vergers. J'ai pris les bougies dans la réserve. Il y en a beaucoup. 297.
With the temperature near freezing, Louise didn't hesitate. She told her children to get moving immediately. They dressed warmly and worked together, placing the wax cylinders exactly where Pierre instructed. By morning, frost covered the ground, but the fruit trees had been perfectly preserved thanks to the wax cylinders. Seeing her son Felix dancing with Pierre in celebration, a genuine smile appeared on Louise's face. After the children, exhausted from working all night, had fallen asleep, Louise took out some pastries she had prepared to sell at the market later and offered some to Pierre to express her gratitude. Seeing that he was still silent and showed no intention of leaving, she tentatively asked, "Why don't we go to the market together to sell the pastries?" Upon hearing this, Pierre, usually so stern, finally showed a glimmer of expression. An old regular customer noticed the unfamiliar face and curiously asked about his identity.
Nouveau votre vendre?
Ma fille n'a pas pu venir.
Il est bel homme, hein?
C'est un ami.
Louise casually explained, but this only made the old lady more skeptical. She walked up to Pierre, intending to make things difficult for him, and observed Louise's reaction to confirm her suspicions. Unexpectedly, Pierre answered every question about jams and pastries fluently, even explaining the theories behind them. Watching this scene from a distance, Louise was utterly shocked. She hadn't expected the seemingly dull Pierre to be so knowledgeable. Seeing the old lady tormented by Pierre's endless explanations, Louise quickly stepped in to smooth things over. Finally, when Pierre stopped talking, the old lady forced out a polite remark. Just as she was about to leave, looking a bit dejected, she saw Pierre squat down and tie Louise's slightly loose shoelace. The old lady, her suspicions confirmed, left with a mischievous smile, while Louise could only watch helplessly. What Louise had feared ultimately happened. She knew well this old lady's talent for spreading gossip. By tomorrow, every vendor in the market would likely know she was in love. But used to being misunderstood and judged by others, Louise didn't let it affect her mood. For the next 3 hours with someone to talk to by her side, Louise no longer felt as bored as she usually did. Through this brief interaction, she observed that, apart from being quiet and somewhat awkward, Pierre behaved no differently from a normal person. However, not long after she reached this conclusion, the car nearly lost control due to excessive speed. While Louise was still shaken, Pierre was terrified. He flung the car door open, ignored her attempts to stop him, and ran off frantically. Louise abandoned the car and chased after him through several winding streets, finally finding the panicked Pierre by sheer luck. Meanwhile, Jules had found the note Pierre had left before leaving and learned he had gone to Louise's house. But before he could head out to find him, some government officials arrived at the bookstore. Having failed to locate Pierre in the mountains, they came here looking for clues. Realizing their determination to take Pierre, Jules lied and claimed Pierre had not returned. While he was busy dealing with the group, Louise had already taken the gradually calming Pierre back home and left a voicemail for Jules, explaining what had just happened. The good impression from the morning vanished in an instant. Pierre suddenly became a hot potato. Though there was no doubt about his character, and he treated her very well, Louise, unable to fully understand his behavior, didn't want to keep living in constant worry. Just then, a familiar face appeared in her sight. Paul, one of her suitors and the largest landholder in the area, had long promised to help her settle her debts if she agreed to marry him. Facing Paul's straightforward proposal once again, Louise didn't know how to politely refuse when Pierre suddenly walked over.
Paul? Pierre. Pas Paul. J'aime pas Paul.
Non, Paul, c'est moi.
J'aime pas.
After rambling nonsense for a bit, Pierre didn't leave. Instead, he stayed nearby and listened to Louise and Paul's conversation. It was only then that he realized why Louise had gone to the bank that day. Watching Louise outside the window, tirelessly making calls to raise money, Pierre felt helpless. All he could do now was try not to cause her any more trouble. But when the rebellious Emma insisted on going out in revealing clothes, it was the last straw for this strong mother. Her emotions finally burst out uncontrollably. Watching this unfold, Pierre had 1,000 things he wanted to say but didn't know how to express them. Half an hour passed quickly. After calming down, Louise found Pierre in the yard. From his dependent behavior, she could easily tell that Pierre liked her. But she clearly understood that what she needed most right now wasn't someone who loved her wholeheartedly, but a man who could help her through this crisis and share her burdens. Obviously, Pierre was not that kind of man. As if sensing what Louise was about to say, he spoke first.
Je comprends qu'on ne veuille pas de moi. Je ne suis pas facile à vivre.
Oh, alors vraiment, j'ai connu pire. Hein.
While comforting Pierre, Louise was also thinking about how to refuse him without hurting his feelings. Though intelligent, Pierre understood the meaning behind her words, yet stubbornly insisted on staying. Left with no other option, Louise used her children as an excuse, hoping to persuade him to leave.
C'est juste que les choses sont déjà assez compliquées comme ça. Puis il y a les enfants aussi. Félix qui s'attache à vous, c'est pas simple.
Pourquoi?
Mais parce qu'il est petit. Parce que, je sais pas, on peut pas débarquer dans la vie des gens comme ça. C'est pas comme ça que ça se passe.
This tactic had always worked with other suitors, but for Pierre, it became an opportunity. Without explaining, and despite Louise's confusion, he grabbed his ever-present laptop and headed out. From this moment, Pierre began to reveal his astounding computer skills. With just the phone number he had gotten from Louise, he precisely located Emma's whereabouts. After hours of travel, Pierre arrived at a bar just as night fell. Summoning his courage, he stepped into the noisy crowd and immediately saw Emma being harassed by an older man. After taking Emma out of the bar, Pierre ignored her questions and confusion, focusing intently on operating his laptop. Finally, just as Emma was about to lose her patience, she glanced at the screen.
Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça?
Le satellite localise ton téléphone. Le téléphone est dans ta poche. Et moi, je suis assis à côté de toi. Alors on nous voit tous les deux.
Regarde-moi ces deux porcs là. Même leurs sourires sont sales.
Si tu appuies là, ils seront moins sales.
Emma began tentatively pressing the keys Pierre indicated, and as the progress bar reached 100%, an unbelievable scene unfolded. Though there was no fire inside the bar, all of the smoke alarms suddenly went off at the same time. Watching the panicked crowd flee, the look in Emma's eyes changed. The previous impatience was gone, replaced with admiration for Pierre's incredible skills. Meanwhile, having received the phone message, Jules had already arrived at Louise's home. He explained Pierre's hacking talents and current situation to Louise. Pierre was a math genius with a photographic memory and hacking skills that even national security agencies found troublesome. Even more remarkable, he was entirely self-taught. However, it was this same curiosity that had one day led him to accidentally breach a national security database. Under normal circumstances, he would have been sentenced to prison. But upon discovering his talent, the authorities offered him a choice: serve them instead of serving time. During transport, Pierre had used a bathroom break as an excuse and escaped. And that was how the car accident at the start of the story happened. As they were talking, the sound of a motorcycle suddenly came from the yard.
Bon, tu dis pas à ma mère où j'étais, s'il te plaît.
Seeing Pierre return, Jules hurried out to persuade him to leave, but Pierre firmly refused. Previously, Louise had been hesitant about keeping him. But now, knowing his extraordinary talent, she was determined to send him away. She knew she couldn't selfishly ruin his bright future, nor did she want him to risk prison by stubbornly staying.
Je crois que c'est l'occasion de leur montrer de quoi vous êtes capable. De toute façon, vous ne pouviez pas rester ici éternellement.
Pourquoi?
Parce qu'il n'y a pas la place.
Il y avait de la place pour votre mari.
C'est différent.
Pourquoi c'est différent?
Mais parce que c'était mon mari.
Vous voulez vous marier? Vous préférez que je m'en aille?
Je crois que c'est mieux.
Sensing her determination, Pierre didn't linger. That night he followed Jules back to the bookstore. And so, their love story was temporarily put on hold. Soon after, Jules sent Pierre to a psychiatric clinic to help clear him of the hacking charges, provided it could be proven that he had a psychological condition. However, when questioned by Dr. Forenza, Pierre remained completely silent, refusing to communicate, staring blankly at the goldfish in the tank. Meanwhile, Louise was troubled as well. Her children's moods had clearly shifted since Pierre left. She couldn't understand what Pierre had done in such a short time to cause such a change. There was no need to say much about Emma. Having witnessed Pierre's abilities firsthand, and after hearing her mother's honest account, the rebellious girl now admired him deeply. In fact, during the ride home on the motorcycle that night, Pierre had promised to teach her. For Felix, Pierre felt more like a friend. In the past 2 days when Louise wasn't looking, Felix and Pierre had shared many moments of play and conversation, something none of her suitors had ever managed. When Paul came to visit, the children didn't bother to hide their displeasure. They repeatedly argued with Paul during dinner, and Emma even stormed out halfway through. The children's rejection sped up the end of the meal. As she walked Paul out, Louise gave him her carefully considered decision.
Laisse-moi le temps de leur parler, je te vends la parcelle et je coupe les arbres.
T'es sûr?
Ouais.
Though she didn't say it directly, Paul could hear the rejection in her words. The children's reactions, combined with the pure and kind impression Pierre had left, made Louise reconsider her feelings. Should she choose a secure future or a lifetime of true happiness? As a single mother of 2, she had to think carefully. Looking up at the clear blue sky, she pondered for a long time and finally made her decision. For now, she would set aside her personal life, sell the trees and land to pay off her debts, and let fate take its course. Meanwhile, at the clinic, since Dr. Forenza couldn't get Pierre to respond, she invited Jules to help. Jules didn't begin with an opinion. Instead, he shared a story of a love from his youth, a love that had ended in regret and left him unable to fully move on to this day. The room was filled with sadness. After a brief silence, Pierre's phone rang.
Il paraît qu'elle a des problèmes d'argent. C'est dommage qu'il n'y ait personne pour l'aider parce qu'elle va tout perdre et après, ce sera trop tard. Ce qui est compliqué dans les choix, c'est qu'on ne sait jamais avant. Est-ce qu'elle a envie de me voir, de me parler? Est-ce que c'est elle qui appelle? Comment je peux être sûr? Est-ce que je suis mieux avec elle ou tout seul ici à coller des gommettes sur les murs comme un fada?
Allô?
Oui?
Tu m'as piégé?
Oui. Mais t'as répondu. Alors maintenant t'arrêtes ton numéro, t'as rien à faire ici.
Elle veut pas de moi.
Peut-être. Mais au fond t'en sais rien. Le mieux c'est encore de vérifier.
That afternoon in the orchard, Louise began cutting down the trees with a logging machine. As one tree after another fell, her heart slowly grew numb. But just as she was about halfway done, a familiar figure appeared in the distance. Shutting off the machine, she jumped down and, hardly daring to believe it, walked toward Pierre. But just as she neared, he changed direction. With a mix of emotions, Louise chased after him.
Pierre! Pierre!
Je suis là.
Pierre had already reached an agreement with the authorities. He would work for them on the condition that he help Louise pay off all her debts.
La banque ne va pas saisir la maison. Le prêt hypothécaire peut être dénoncé.
Pierre moved Louise to tears.
Je ne fais pas de parapente. Je ne vais pas m'en aller, je ne vais pas mourir. Je ne vais pas vous laisser toute seule. Je me sens beaucoup mieux quand vous êtes là. Quand vous n'êtes pas là, j'ai l'impression que je vais tomber.
With the simplest, most sincere words, Pierre moved Louise to tears. 2 people living on the fringes of society had, through a strange encounter, filled the missing pieces of each other's lives. At the end of the film, Dr. Forenza came to Louise's house, formally entrusting Pierre's care to her and agreeing to pay her a monthly salary. It was enough to ensure the family lived comfortably, and Pierre only needed to assist when necessary. As a new chapter of their happy life began, the film came to an end.